let's start from closest neighbors, Hungary.
Good afternoon, Mr. Minister. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I read that we will meet our Minister for Foreign Affairs next week, and I would like you to ask how would you evaluate now relationship between Hungary and Ukraine after the meeting of Prime Minister and President, and what do you expect from the next week meeting with Mr. Szijjártó? Thank you.
Well, so far the meeting with Peter is not on my schedule, but so I don't know where this information comes from. But it's true that we're talking. We know each other for a while, and we both did a lot to normalize relations between Ukraine and Hungary. We were really keen to achieve this goal. Like some months ago, we met in Uzhhorod in Ukraine, and we launched a bilateral track to resolve all outstanding issues in our bilateral relations. This conversation continues. Peter represents Hungary, and myself and head of presidential office Andriy Yermak, we represent Ukraine. And our position is simple. We want to resolve bilateral issues on a bilateral basis, and we are committed to it, and we are making steps forward. And we count that Hungary will not be blocking Ukraine-related steps at the EU and NATO level when it comes to this, because we did provide assurances that we are willing to solve the outstanding issue on a bilateral basis, and we are already working on it.
Okay, next one, another neighbor of Ukraine, Poland. Agnieszka, I see you with us, so please make your question. Yeah, just switch on.
Yeah. Okay, I'm fine. Good to see you. Good evening. My first question would be: would you think that such countries as Moldova and Georgia, I have in mind South Ossetia, of course, are next targets of Putin? And please, if you find time to comment on Ukrainian-Polish relations right now, and if there are any negotiations concerning farmers, I would be very grateful. Thank you.
I don't know why everyone forgot about the document that Russia distributed in December, I think December 2021. In that official document, Moscow demanded that NATO rolls back to the 1997 borders in Europe, which coincide with the borders of the former socialist bloc controlled by the Soviet Union, of which Poland was a member. So I wouldn't limit Putin's ambitions only to Moldova, Georgia, and Georgia. His plans are going far, far further, and he will move as further as he is allowed to. And this is why the most efficient way to prevent a situation when NATO and Central European countries will have to be fighting Russian soldiers in their own territory is to help Ukraine defeat Russia in our own territory. It's a very simple math, because whatever the price of helping Ukraine is, the price of fighting a war yourself is much, much higher, including the ultimate price that we are paying, which is the loss of human lives. So if we are to agree that, and everyone seems to agree, that Putin believes that the loss of the Soviet Union is the biggest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, and it was a quote of him, and he wants to restore it, then his aggressive ambitions go far beyond the borders of his immediate neighbors. Although he does not recognize the rights of many nations to remain sovereign within existing borders. So countries in Central Asia should feel worried as well. On Ukrainian-Polish relations, I think everything is fine except trade and mainly agricultural trade. We have good engagement on the issue of security assistance, good cooperation on EU and NATO tracks. We have an issue with agriculture, and our relevant experts are working on it. I think the less this issue is politicized, the better, the higher will be the chances to resolve this issue. Thank you.
Let's now go across the ocean. I see Francesca Chambers with us from USA Today, so it's your turn.
Thank you very much. A couple questions. First, what is Ukraine's stance on the waivable no-interest loan that U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham proposed yesterday during his trip? And on a related note, when do you expect the ATACMS the U.S. is sending to Ukraine to arrive? And then finally, if you could please elaborate on the anticipated outcomes of the NATO-Washington summit later this year that was discussed during the conversation with Secretary Blinken, that would be much appreciated.
Ukraine already receives support in different forms. Some of it comes as grants, in the form of grants, and other support comes in the form of loans. So we are not shocked to hear the proposal coming from the United States. But the question is, of course, how about the overall structure of the assistance that will be provided. And we haven't seen any details of this proposal except the broad mentioning of loans instead of grants. We have to really look into details, but it's not something that shocks us because, as I told you, we already receive support in different forms. What really matters and what shocks us, what does shock us, is that the decision hasn't been adopted yet. We are approaching the end of March, and deliberations continue. Deliberations on the issue of vital interest to strategic interests of the United States and in Europe and globally. Because, as I mentioned in my remarks, the success of Putin in Ukraine will mean that other places in the world will flare up, because some countries will feel motivated to follow Russian footprints. So again, the cheapest way to avoid bigger expenditures on world security, on keeping the world together, is to support Ukraine today. So we want this debate in the United States to be over in a good way, with a final decision that will reestablish that will not allow the American leadership in the world to be shattered. The second question was on ATACMS. Yes, ATACMS 300, the long range, is very much needed and expected in Ukraine, we are waiting for it to happen. And the third question was on Washington Summit. Well, we are in very active engagement with NATO leadership, but also with key allies on what the outcome of Washington Summit should be. You know our position very well. We think that Ukraine meets the main criteria of membership, which is the capacity to defend NATO borders. That's what we are doing by defending Ukraine. But I wouldn't go too far in commenting on the stage of our deliberations with partners, because we are, let me just say this, we are working hard to make a strong a far-reaching step towards Ukraine's membership in NATO at the Washington summit.
Let's